Halt! Who goes there?
'Tis I, CJ the prop maker. I have ridden the length and breadth of this land in search of those who will subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow my social media. I have ridden since before the floods ravaged the southern reaches, since before Sir Chris of the Rock was violently attacked by Sir Will of House Smith. I have ridden since before King Vlad the Mad laid siege to his neighbours, and since before even the plague came to ravage us.
What? Ridden on a horse?
Yes?
You're using a coconut.
What?
You've got 2 empty halves of a coconut and you're banging them together.
Well, it doesn't matter. I have ridden
Where'd you get the coconut?
I made it.
Made it? But coconuts are naturally occurring.
House and home stores may sell entire Home Depots worth of plastic decorative plants, or Wolf from Armory Terrain may make entire video compilations showing his collection of homemade EVA foam mushrooms, yet this is a strange concept to you?
I'm not trying to start an argument here, but it sounds like you could just simply go to the grocer's, buy a coconut, crack it open, and then dry it out.
Well, maybe he doesn't get coconuts where he's from. Maybe he lives in a temperate zone.
What about Amazon? It should be simple just to buy a coconut off Amazon.
So sorry about them, but if you are interested in learning how to make yourself a pair of Monty Python coconuts, then stay tuned.
Yeah, but he makes things so accessible.
If you've got an internet connection, that is.
Hello there people of the internet, CJ the prop maker, back again with another video. Well, it's taking me a bit longer to get to part 2 of the LARP sword review than I thought it would. The package has arrived, but the problem is, it's at my mom's house in Hermannsburg. I'm currently at my dad's place in Richmond, so in the meantime, I thought I'd make another video and show you how to make a coconut from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. But first, perhaps a bit of background. For those of you who don't know, Monty Python was a British surreal absurdist comedy group that were active from the late 60s to the early 80s, I believe. I'm sure someone will correct me down below if I'm wrong. But basically, they were a comedy group that focused on surreal, strange, absurd, often downright insane humor. They started with radio sketches, then they moved on to TV sketches, and then they moved on to movies. One of those movies was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which, as its name suggests, is a period piece and a spoof of the legend of King Arthur. And for the film, they couldn't afford any actual horses. There is one actual horse, but it only appears for like a couple of seconds and then it's gone. But for the main majority of the movie, instead of riding actual horses, the guys are just going around clapping coconuts together, and they're like running around pretending to ride a horse while someone runs behind them clapping 2 coconuts together. Like that, and it can be pretty hilarious to watch sometimes. If you haven't seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I highly suggest that you go and check it out. It is one of the great comedic classics, and it's still being referenced to this day. Anyway, these are much more useful than just having them so that you can show off to your friends saying, look, I've got a replica of a prop from a movie. These also have application for, like, say, if you do stage productions and you need to make horse sound effects, like there we go. And even if you want to do your own stage play production of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, these are a must-have. And hey, maybe they might even have an application for LARP where you can go around clapping coconuts if you want to say you're riding a horse. Could be interesting. So stay tuned and I will show you how to make yourself a pair of Monty Python coconuts. And before anyone says anything, yes, I know, I could just go to the shop, buy a coconut, split it in half, let it dry out and then use that. But the thing is, I have not seen coconuts very often for sale in shops here in my home province of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. They're just not common enough to be just randomly found on a shop shelf, you know? So this video is for everyone who doesn't have the option of simply going out and buying a coconut. So yeah, this is for people who want to make their own. This is everything you will need to make your Monty Python coconuts, as well as several other things, but I will get into that later. These are the basics of what you will need. Some lightweight clay. I am going to be using Bostik Crazy Clay, but you can use any kind of lightweight clay you can find. A couple of plastic tubs. I'm using empty lightweight clay tubs, but you can use any kind of empty plastic tub you've got, so long as you have two of them, and so long as they make a decent impression of horse hooves when you clap them together. If you've even got sheet plastic, you could just turn two domes out of that using the heat gun, but I'm going to be using these because they are readily available to me. You're also going to need some plastic primer, but you can also use PVA glue as well. You're also going to need some paints and a paintbrush. And you're also going to need several tools, including a belt sander or sandpaper if you've got the time, and a heat gun. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our plastic tubs and we are going to get the lids off them. Just put the lids to one side for now. And this is what is going to become the two halves of our coconut. Now comes the tricky part. We've now moved to the workshop where I'm going to start dishing the tubs. What I mean by that is I'm going to make the base of the bowls, the bottom part here. I'm going to make it rounder and stretch it out a little to make it look more like a coconut. And to do that, I'm going to be using my trusty heat gun. And I'm going to be using my makeshift dishing rig. What do I mean by that? Well, it basically means I take this broken off part from an old hand drill and I clamp it in the vise so that it now provides a very handy dishing setup. I will try and capture as much of the process as possible, so bear with me. It's important to keep a circular motion going. That way the heat gets evenly distributed. And be careful not to focus too much on one part of the tub, or else you risk melting the plastic altogether. And it's always advisable to have a container of water nearby. I'm using a jug full of water because when that plastic gets hot, it gets really, really hot, and you will have to cool it off regularly to avoid burning your fingers. And eventually you should end up with something like this, except not as wrinkly. This wrinkle here goes to show what can happen if you let certain spots in the plastic get too much heat. And remember, even when you're done with the heat gun, be very, very careful, because the tip here stays hot for a while, and it stays hot enough that if you touch it, you are going to blister or even leave a permanent scar. So make sure your heat gun is out of the way where it can't hurt anybody until it cools down enough for you to put it away. It's at this point that you're gonna want to get your safety goggles and your earmuffs on, because this next bit, depending on whether you're using a belt sander or regular sandpaper is going to get not only very messy, but very loud as well. I'm going to be using my trusty belt sander for this one, which is why I'm wearing my safety goggles and my earmuffs. But if you're using just regular sandpaper, then you don't need either of these. It's just that the belt sander tends to throw bits of whatever you're grinding all over the place. And what we're going to do here is we are going to take the little domes that we have created, the little plastic domes, and we are going to sand the surface so that the primer will stick to it properly. And we're also going to use this opportunity to remove this little ridge here. If your container that you're using or the plastic that you're using doesn't have that, then you don't need to bother with that. But you still need to sand the surface so that the paint and the primer adhere properly. And here we go. The domes are now all sanded. Bit of neatening that needs to happen now because it's a bit of an unclean surface, so we will need to go in and clean up with regular sandpaper now anyway, but that's the bulk of the sanding done. Now, with the domes all sanded, don't know how well you can see this, but I've sanded both the outside and the inside, so there is practically no shiny surface left. There is a little bit, but it's not very noticeable. Anyway, the point is, now that I've sanded both the outside and the inside, both the outside and the inside are now going to be much more susceptible to being painted and what have you. Now comes the next part, which is the lightweight clay. For those of you who have no idea what lightweight clay is, you can just get it open here. It comes in these little tubs. Wait a minute. These are two different styles of tubs. First off, this is the original Crazy Clay container, and it just comes like this in the box. No plastic wrap, nothing. This one must be some kind of new generation of lightweight clay, because I have never seen this before. I have never seen the plastic wrap or this style of container. I suppose that must have been in response to customer complaints, because a lot of times when the containers were like this, I would often open a fresh package to find that some of the clay had dried out, and that can happen. And so I guess they just fixed that by having an airtight container and by it coming in a plastic wrap. So I guess it's a quality assurance stamp? I don't know. I've just never seen this before. Anyway, confusing new packaging aside, if you don't know about lightweight clay, what it is, it's basically like the same consistency of Play-Doh, but it's a little bit lighter and spongier, and it eventually sets to a point where it's a similar consistency to EVA foam. It's a bit denser, but it's a similar consistency. And I have done cool stuff with lightweight clay in the past, like my wooden Conan the Barbarian inspired war sword. All of the detailing you see here on the pommel and on the hilt, part of it is wood on the inside and a bit of cardboard up here, but all of this detailing you see here is lightweight clay that I layered over the cardboard and the wood and then sculpted it. And I got this. Pretty cool, don't you think? I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, the next step is we are going to take some lightweight clay and we are going to place it over the top of the dome. We're not going to place it on the inside, just on the outside. And because we've sanded the outside of the dome, it should mean that the lightweight clay is going to stick right to the plastic. No other measure needed. Or at least I hope. That's how it's going to work. Yeah, as you can see, it worked the first time, so I have no reason to believe it shouldn't work this time. Also, if you can see, the surface of the coconuts I have already made is relatively smooth. With these new ones, I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to take a skewer and I'm going to use it to, I'm going to press it into the lightweight clay while it dries to form this kind of rough, groovy surface like a hairy coconut shell would be, and we'll see how well that turns out. Okay, so I've gotten the lightweight clay out of the container, and as you can see, very similar consistency to Play-Doh. Maybe some might even say press stick or glue tack. Now what we're going to do is we're going to place it over the sanded dome. A lot of finger work here, and you must be careful not to spread it too thin or else you will make holes in the clay. Just be sure to get it nice and even. Don't worry about little excess over the edges, we'll deal with that just now. And once you're satisfied that you've got a nice even coating of lightweight clay over the dome, you fold the excess over the edge and you press it down on a flat surface. I'm using the box of the lightweight clay. Press it down like you're cutting a cookie, and away comes the excess, and it goes back in the container. Now we even it out a bit more, and just make sure that you won't be able to see the plastic through the clay. That's the big takeaway point here. Fold over the excess once again and press down. Remove excess, place in the container for later use. So now I'm going to take my sculpting tool. As I said, I'm going to be using a skewer. Oh, James, what's a skewer, you might be asking? Well, if you're not from my home country of South Africa, then you probably won't use the term skewer. You'll probably say something like shish kebab stick or shashlik stick or what have you. We call them skewers. Oh, I dropped my skewer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press it into the clay here, just to create little grooves. And I'm just going to keep pressing into the clay until I feel resistance. That tells me that I am going nice and deep into the clay. And what I'm doing here is basically creating the illusion that it's a hairy coconut shell. You can do it smooth as well, but you know, when it comes to my props, I like a bit of variety myself. And coconuts, you know, they vary from tree to tree. And here we have the coconut shell, nicely shaped, and the clay has been formed to the dome. And I am now going to leave this to one side so that the clay can harden into its foam-like consistency. And in the meantime, I'm going to get the other one done. And then when all of the clay has hardened properly, I can then start to think about paint and primer. So our coconuts are now nice and dry. The clay has dried to a nice foam-like consistency, and if you just wanted something that would look like a coconut, that you don't care if it gets a bit dinged up a little, then you could just start with the paint right away. But because I want something that's going to last through extensive use on stage, I want to, first of all, before I start with the paint, I'm going to hit this with a layer of primer. And then when the primer is dried, then we will continue onto the painting process. So I've now applied primer to the inside of the shell, but as you can see, it kind of stuck it kind of adhered, but it also kind of didn't. That's to be expected when you apply the first coat of primer. Even when you sand the surface, there are going to be some areas that don't quite adhere properly, which can result in this patchy job. Same with the other one. But what we're going to do is we're going to ignore that, and we're going to wait for this coat of primer to dry, and then we're going to keep applying layers of primer until we get a nice even coat of primer and we can't see any patches. So 6 layers of primer later, and this is how they turned out. Now when I say 6 layers of primer, what I mean is there are 5 layers of primer on the inside and 1 on the outside. Why have I done it like that? Well, you could technically do just an equal number of coats everywhere on the coconuts, but because the outside of the coconuts are lightweight clay and the inside is just solid plastic, because of that, paint will adhere better to the outside than the inside. And in fact, you can forego priming the outside altogether, but I just want to be a bit more thorough than that. So, and now of course we're about to move on to painting. We're going to start the paint job once more from the inside, and then when the inside is done, we are going to start painting the outside. I should probably mention as well that I'm using acrylic paint for my paint job, but you can use whatever kind of paint you feel comfortable with. I'm just using acrylic paint because I am most familiar with that kind of paint. And for the inside, you can use solid white, like this here. It doesn't really matter if you use solid white or this kind of color. I just prefer to use this kind of color because, yes, no one's gonna care what the inside of your fake coconut looks like. But, like, because, you know, you're gonna be up on stage, you're gonna be clapping these coconuts, no one's gonna see what the inside looks like. In fact, you can even just forego painting entirely, provided your primer is white, and just leave it white on the inside. But I'm just gonna give it a coat of paint, and I'm gonna use this color, which I made using a mixture of white, brown, a bit of yellow, and a bit of grey, and it came up with this. So I'll get to that, and then I'll meet you back here when I'm done with the paint job on the inside of the coconuts. First layer of paint is done, and I need to just leave it to dry, and I will continue to add layers until we get a nice even coating. So 3 coats of paint later on the inside, and it's done. Now we're ready to start on the outside. I'm going to be using a dark shade of brown for the base. In this case I'm using umber, and for the layer on top of that I'm going to be using golden brown. So after waiting for the paint to dry, here we are. Our Monty Python coconuts are finished. Now the paint job didn't exactly turn out the way I'd wanted. Maybe I was a bit too heavy-handed with the top layer, but oh well, they still look serviceable. Now for this next part I'm going to show you how to use them effectively, or at least the method I've seen for using them effectively. And that is, you take your coconut shells, one in each hand, gripping them by the tips of your fingers, and you put your hands together so that the balls of your hand are touching, and make sure that the coconuts are lined up properly. And for the best effect, make sure that one coconut is slightly higher up than the other, so that the sound is reverberating through the hollow of the shell and exiting through. You get my point. This gives the best effect. It also helps to keep it consistent in tone and helps you maintain a steady rhythm. So here we are. This has been a video on how to make Monty Python coconuts from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to try making yourself a pair of Monty Python coconuts, I will put a list of components down in the description. Most of these things can be found either in the home, or you can buy them from an arts and craft shop, or you can buy them online, or else you can substitute lightweight clay for other kinds of hardening modeling clay. I just used what I had available to me, and I did what I could with what I had. Hope this has been helpful to you. If you have an alternate method of how to make Monty Python coconuts, then please do share. I'd love to hear how many methods there are for this purpose. And I'm always pleased to meet a fellow craftsman. That's going to be all for this video. I will get part 2 of the LARP sword review out as soon as possible. I will be travelling back to Hermannsburg shortly, and I will be able to make a video then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, then slash that like button right down the middle, and I will see you in the next one.